There's no guarantees in life except for death and taxes, and that some of your software library dependencies will be out of date next week. Software doesn't maintain itself, at least not yet, which means developers need to do the work to keep things functional and up to date. In this expert chat, I have a conversation with Jeroen Fürst, a long-time Kentico MVP and architect at TrueLime, a Kentico Gold partner digital agency. Jeroen shares his perspective on how his team keeps their Kentico projects up to date, why it's never been easier than with Xperience by Kentico's continuous and incremental release cycle, and how he explains the value of this work to his clients at his digital agency. We talk about update automation, the architect's role in making technology selections or guiding them, and why it's just as important for a team to keep their knowledge and skills up to date along with their project dependencies. Okay, let's jump over to the conversation. We're going to talk about is what are the strategies that you use for keeping dependencies in your solutions up to date, including Xperience by Kentico? Like what types of strategies do you have? And to kind of pinpoint on that, for example, for you, what's the value even of keeping dependencies up to date and keeping Xperience by Kentico up to date? What's the value there?
Yeah, that's a great question. To answer it, I also need to introduce some history here. Because, like I mentioned, 15 years ago, I started with Kentico, and it was a total different world. But also from my role, the way how we did software development is totally different from how we did it today. I mean, I remember the days where I was just hacking on production, and nowadays that's a big no-go, which is good. But sometimes you need to adjust to it and make. It can slow things down, but I guess it's all for the best. So I'm happy with that. But to come back to your question, I think it's important that software gets its updates regularly, meaning that we typically look at our projects and they have a length of, let's say, 5 to 7 years on average, where a client has a project, we build it, and we keep run it and maintain it in that time period. And in those years, we need to have something in place where we can update our software on a regular basis, because software nowadays gets attacked a lot. There are security vulnerabilities inside software, and you need to address them because you don't want to have a website with leaks which can be hacked or at least exposed. So luckily, the software nowadays is easier to update. Coming from very early versions of Kentico, an update usually costs quite a lot of effort to manage. But nowadays, it's quite popular and usual that these updates are a smaller scale, meaning that on a monthly or 2-monthly basis, we can apply patches, security hotfixes, or even refreshes when it comes to Xperience by Kentico. So we can easily get the software up to date and apply the latest standards that are required for the project, with an additional benefit of also getting some new features from time to time. So this helps us get our clients happy again, because they, once they started working, they are also looking for things that validate that an upgrade needs to take place. So a lot of times we get the question, hey, okay, so I need to upgrade my system, but what will I gain from it? Yeah. And if we would only answer, well, your software is patched and there's no security issues anymore, then the IT usually is happy, but the end client, the editor, the marketer, they feel like, okay, good, but what do we get out of it? So we want to provide the whole spectrum of every role that's working with the software. We want to achieve that they get their updates and inform them of what's new. And yeah, I think that's something to really um, uh, uh, focus on when doing software projects nowadays. And a good benefit, I mean, we do a lot of DevOps development using tooling, is that a lot of these kind of things can be automated. And one of the most recent automations that we are looking into applying is a tool called Renovate. Renovate is a software platform that can automatically check packages that are being used. It could be NuGet packages, npm packages, and it can already do some automation there. It can create pull requests where all minor versions of the packages, which you have newer ones, can already be updated and bumped. We're looking into how to automate some testing against these updates. So, it's the time to go to the next version, let's say, is getting easier with less risks, because the software automation part of testing, etc., is quite matured over the last couple of years, and we can therefore easily apply these updates when they come available and keep our software up to date.
So would you say, given that detailed explanation, that the value for a customer, client of yours, and for your team and everyone involved, the value of keeping dependencies up to date is security, and then also new capabilities. Those are like the primary things that you focus on. And then to be able to keep those things up to date, it's easier if the changes that you're applying are smaller. So smaller, more frequent updates tend to be easier to accommodate for your team and for a client.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I have had even recently some examples where software which was, let's say, built on technology from 3-4 years ago, which was not updated during that time, now run into issues. For example, we built a mobile app, which is targeted for iOS, for Apple, and also for Android. And these platforms, they require you to change the software and update the software to target the newer versions that come out from time to time. What we've noticed is that we've built an application, and then we tried to update it regularly, but there was not always the budget to do that. So in the end effect, it was some older software versions, and now the application was not allowed to be put into the stores anymore. And we had to really go from an old version to a recent version, and the time that it costs to do all these software updates. And usually it's you need to do an incremental update. So you go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and you cannot jump from 2 to 8, for example. That's usually quite hard. And then you have to evaluate if you want to do a rebuild, or if you want to go from the bump up the version from the over the last couple of years that came out. So that makes it, when I said if the updates are on a more regular basis and smaller piece by piece, then it's much easier to keep on track and be aligned with the latest that is coming out.
Yeah, you don't even have to make that decision ever. Do we need to rebuild or somehow accommodate all these changes that we've missed out on?
Yes. Yes, and I think looking at it from a company perspective, it also forces us to change our way of work to accommodate these kinds of newer ways that we need to apply these hot fixes. So we inform our clients, next year you need to reserve capacity so we can apply these fixes. So in the end, you will benefit of us having your software up to date. So it's more of a built-in thing nowadays. While maybe compared to 4 or 5 years ago, we had to sell every upgrade to our clients and convince them there's benefits of having that upgrade, but it's a pain because usually the length and the amount of hours you need to spend in such of upgrades are quite large.
Yeah, that's interesting that something that feels very technical, like keeping package dependencies up to date, actually has an impact on business and sales strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of how all these things are kind of interconnected.
Mhm.
So I can tell that it's important from your perspective as an architect to keep these dependencies up to date, whether that's the core product like Xperience by Kentico that a solution is built on, or any other third party packages or libraries that you add. Um, and if things are updating frequently, that can be an additional cost that maybe a client would have to pay to continuously apply those. And so it makes sense that automation would be very important for taking advantage of the benefits of frequent smaller updates, but not have the costs of always just spending all of your time applying updates to solutions.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's something I think also you need to mature as an organization to get this in place. I mean, this isn't something that we fixed from one day to another. We really had to have lots of discussions, figure out where to invest in what kind of automation, which makes sense. Also, choosing tooling, we've sort of downside that to we what was it called, getting good, staff with knowledgeable staff within the things that we do, and we want to limit it down. So we don't want to do all these nice, all these types of new shiny technologies. We want to
Mm-hmm.
focus on primary languages like .NET. That's something like um, if it's .NET, then it's easier to get it into a project or for a client or at TrueLime, because we know that it's technology that we have people that have quite a lot of knowledge about. Um, that makes it sometimes easier because you can easier filter which packages you want to introduce and which not.
Mm-hmm.
But it sometimes also makes it a little bit more complex because yeah, maybe someone from the university prefers to work with
Yeah.
uh, shiny tech, which we don't offer or don't allow. Uh, yeah, but these all have implications on how we approach this nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot that goes into those discussions and those decisions. Like you said, your team's skill set, uh, cost of the project to the client. So if you do choose some new technology, maybe there is a benefit to that, but there's a need to gain skills and experience with that, which there's an implied cost there. And so, yeah, all these types of things, I think I could imagine it's easy to um, assume that you just keep your packages up to date, but actually
Yeah.
there's a lot going on behind the decisions being made there.
Yeah.
And people on teams like you that have a lot of experience and have maybe seen decisions made in the past that didn't pay off, that didn't turn out how you wanted, and you take those insights and it helps you to make decisions uh, uh, for your company
Yeah.
and for teams that you work with to make better decisions in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus, you mentioned that I make for my role, it makes sense to make certain decisions, but we also want to, we don't want to lock it down for every developer that works here. We just want to have a platform where they feel free to pick and choose solutions that are beneficial to their tasks, but not uh, uh, limit them down to, let's say, something that they need to ask me to use. So I
Yeah.
usually encourage my teams to, come up with good solutions, do some investigation, and if it feels right, then we can make it work. I want to really give them the podium to be in control of what they want to build, and not have, let's say, be the puppet master that controls everything that they do. But that also makes it sometimes even more difficult to keep track of what's happening, because I'm not involved with every package installation. I sometimes look at, for example, pull requests to just get a glimpse of what's happening. But having these set of rules for how we work in place makes me make my job easier because I don't have to control it. And I hope for our teams, the work also much more enjoyable because they can really have some influence on how they want to build something.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So there's some people that might say the best third-party dependency or library or package is no dependency, in that if we don't bring it in and use it, we don't have to continually update it or look for security issues in it. And from what I'm hearing, it doesn't seem like that's your perspective, but at the same time, there's some consideration that does need to be made when deciding whether or not to add a package, and you like to give your teams the autonomy in general to make those decisions, um, with the understanding that, hey, the goal here is to bring value to the client, and as long as we're doing that and making some decisions that will benefit us and them in the future, then go ahead and use what you need to use. Does that seem like am I describing the perspective that you have on it accurately?
Yeah, I think it summarizes it quite well. Maybe with the small tweak that typically our lead devs, they control what's eventually getting into the product. So there is some type of additional check, and they usually, if it's really, let's say, out of bounds, then they would flag it, and then we would discuss it, and then find a way to get it in. Yeah, but yeah, I would see it as a sort of mantra or motto, or like what's it called, a spot on the horizon, something like that. So we want to really empower people to feel that they can influence what they're doing, but with the right caution.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. There's probably a whole nother conversation related to this about having your team paying attention to those things on the horizon so that you can choose to make investments in maybe larger technology decisions, dependencies, things like that when they're coming. So I've heard lots of developers in the .NET space talking about Blazor. Well, that's a whole thing unto itself. And choosing as a team whether or not you're going to adopt that or even invest time into it, that's another discussion that can be had. And maybe today it doesn't feel like a dependency, but in a way it kind of is. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. That's really also what makes the fun, the job fun. Maybe I just want to touch on is where I also saw in previous years a lot of complexity is when you have multiple teams and the alignment between them. So let's say you mentioned Blazor. One team decides to work on Blazor because it's .NET, so why not? And the other team says, "No, we feel more comfortable with React as a front end stack in combination with .NET, which is basically also what we do nowadays." Then we had all these sort of islands working on different technologies, and then it's becoming a real mess. So just to illustrate those kinds of things, I really want to prevent, and via monthly tech meetings, we discuss these kinds of topics. I really share, the knowledge. So I see something like how do we do front-end development as a key part of these discussions. So this is shouldn't really be something that a team can easily decide on. Hey, let's do this starting today. This should be something that we really want to align on and have everyone looking in the same direction when we choose to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So kind of what I'm hearing is that when it comes to dependencies in a solution, it's not just about keeping them up to date. Like that's one of the requirements when you decide to adopt one. You got to keep it up to date, make sure it's secure, make sure you're using it correctly. Someone takes ownership over that, but also making sure that you're not creating technology silos within your team that limit people being able to contribute and use that dependency. If it's something small like a tiny library, that's probably less of a concern. But if it's something really big, like saying, okay, we're going to use Next.js with all of our solutions, well, that's the dependency that needs to be kept up to date. But also your entire team needs to be trained on it. Otherwise, only the people that picked it will be able to use it, and everyone else will kind of be excluded from contributing to those types of solutions.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, and we've had that in previous years where we had maybe 4 or 5 agile teams working on different clients, different projects, and this kind of technology spikes were introduced quite a lot, and now we sometimes feel the pain. So the example I mentioned with the app, that's something which was happened because one of those teams eventually chose a path, and we now need to fix it.
Yeah.
Yep. But for
that's interesting.
Towards the future, I think we've learned our lessons, and we want to really avoid these kinds of situations. So,
Yep.
So the spot's still there, but it may be less maybe less agile or less. It pops up less by involving the teams more, having them talk to each other, making sure the guidance is there, and we really want to ensure that the rules are in place and people know how that they can influence their work. And
so I kind of see this coming back around when you were initially talking about dependencies and how you explain the value of keeping something up to date to a client. It's about that communication. You have the communication between project people within your team and developers and the client to make sure everyone understands what's going on here and the value. Also, communication within your team helps make sure that you don't get into those sticky situations where you have dependencies that maybe no one can manage or take ownership of. So it feels like communication is important through the whole part of the process with dependency management. And who would have expected it, thinking, it's just about version numbers, right? This is very technical. No. There's all sorts of human interactions that come into play here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Jeroen, thanks for hanging out with me today and providing all these great insights on these topics. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. Have a great day.